The prince was very worried as he went upstairs and tried as hard as he could to encourage himself. The worst thing, he thought, will be if they don't receive me and think something bad about me, or perhaps receive me and start laughing in my face. Ah, never mind. And, in fact, it was not very frightening, but the question, what would he do there and why was he going? To this question he was decidedly unable to find a reassuring answer. Even if it should be possible in some way to seize an opportunity and tell Nastasia Philippovna. Don't marry this man and don't ruin yourself, he doesn't love you, he loves your money, he told me so himself, and Aglaya Epanchin told me, and I've come to tell you, it would hardly come out right in all respects. Yet another unresolved question emerged, and such a major one that the prince was even afraid to think about it, could not and dared not even admit it, did not know how to formulate it, and blushed and trembled at the very thought of it. But in the end, despite all these anxieties and doubts, he still went in and asked for Nastasia Philippovna. Nastasia Philippovna occupied a not very large but indeed magnificently decorated apartment. There had been a time, at the beginning of those 5 years of her Petersburg life, when Afanasy Ivanovitch had been particularly unstinting of money for her. He was then still counting on her love and thought he could seduce her mainly by comfort and luxury, knowing how easily the habits of luxury take root and how hard it is to give them up later, when luxury has gradually turned into necessity. In this case Totsky remained true to the good old traditions, changing nothing in them, and showing a boundless respect for the invincible power of sensual influences. Nastasia Philippovna did not reject the luxury, even liked it, but, and this seemed extremely strange, never succumbed to it, as if she could always do without it. She even tried several times to declare as much, which always struck Totsky unpleasantly. However, there was much in Nastasia Philippovna that struck Afanasy Ivanovitch unpleasantly, later even to the point of scorn. Not to mention the inelegance of the sort of people she occasionally received, and was therefore inclined to receive, into her intimate circle, there could also be glimpsed in her certain utterly strange inclinations. There appeared a sort of barbaric mixture of two tastes, an ability to get along and be satisfied with things in ways the very existence of which, it seemed, would be unthinkable for a decent and finely cultivated person. Indeed, to give an example, if Nastasia Philippovna had suddenly displayed some charming and graceful ignorance, such as, for instance, that peasant women could not wear cambric undergarments such as she wore, Afanasy Ivanovitch would probably have been extremely pleased with it. This was the result towards which Nastasia Philippovna's entire education had originally been aimed, according to Totsky's program, for he was a great connoisseur in that line, but alas! The results turned out to be strange. In spite of that, there nevertheless was and remained in Nastasia Philippovna something that occasionally struck even Afanasy Ivanovitch himself by its extraordinary and fascinating originality, by some sort of power, and enchanted him on occasion even now, when all his former expectations with regard to Nastasia Philippovna had fallen through. The prince was received by a maid. Nastasia Philippovna always kept female servants, who, to his surprise, listened to his request to be announced without any perplexity. Neither his dirty boots, nor his broad-brimmed hat, nor his sleeveless cloak, nor his embarrassed look caused the slightest hesitation in her. She helped him off with his cloak, asked him to wait in the front hall, and went at once to announce him. The company that had gathered at Nastasia Philippovna's consisted of her most usual and habitual acquaintances. There were even rather few people compared with previous years' gatherings on the same day. Present first and foremost were Afanasy Ivanovitch Totsky and Ivan Fyodorovitch Epanchin. Both were amiable, but both were in some repressed anxiety on account of the poorly concealed expectation of the promised announcement about Ganya. Besides them, naturally, there was Ganya as well, also very gloomy, very pensive, and even almost totally unamiable, who for the most part stood to one side, separately, and kept silent. He had not ventured to bring Varya, but Nastasia Philippovna made no mention of her. Instead, as soon as she greeted Ganya, she reminded him of the scene with the prince. The general, who had not heard about it yet, began to show interest. Then Ganya dryly, restrainedly, but with perfect frankness, told everything that had happened earlier, and how he had already gone to the prince to apologize. With that he warmly voiced his opinion that the prince, quite strangely and for God knows what reason, was called an idiot, that he thought completely the opposite of him, and that he was most certainly a man who kept his own counsel. Nastasia Philippovna listened to this opinion with great attention and followed Ganya curiously, but the conversation immediately switched to Rogozhin, who had taken such a major part in that day's story and in whom Afanasy Ivanovitch and Ivan Fyodorovitch also began to take an extremely curious interest. It turned out that specific information about Rogozhin could be supplied by Tin, who had been hard at work on his business until nearly 9 o'clock that evening. Rogozhin had insisted with all his might that he should get hold of 100,000 rubles that same day. True, he was drunk, Tin observed with that, but, difficult as it is, it seems he'll get the 100,000, only I don't know if it will be today and the whole of it. Many people are working on it, Kinder, Trepalov, Biskup, he's offering any interest they like, though, of course, it's all from drink and in his initial joy, Tin concluded. All this news was received with a somewhat gloomy interest. Nastasia Philippovna was silent, obviously unwilling to speak her mind, Ganya also. General Epanchin was almost more worried than anyone else. The pearls he had already presented earlier in the day had been received with a much too cool politeness, and even with a sort of special smile. Ferdishchenko alone of all the guests was in jolly and festive spirits, and guffawed loudly, sometimes for no known reason, only because he had adopted for himself the role of buffoon. Afanasy Ivanovitch himself, reputed to be a fine and elegant talker, who on previous occasions had presided over the conversation at these parties, was obviously in low spirits and even in some sort of perplexity that was quite unlike him. The remainder of the guests, of whom, incidentally, there were not many, one pathetic little old school teacher, invited for God knows what purpose, some unknown and very young man, who was terribly timid and kept silent all the time, a sprightly lady of about 40, an actress, and one extremely beautiful, extremely well and expensively dressed, and extraordinarily taciturn young lady, were not only unable to enliven the conversation especially, but sometimes simply did not know what to talk about. Thus, the prince's appearance was even opportune. When he was announced, it caused bewilderment and a few strange smiles, especially as it was evident from Nastasia Philippovna's surprised look that she had never thought of inviting him. But after her surprise, Nastasia Philippovna suddenly showed such pleasure that the majority prepared at once to meet the unexpected guest with laughter and merriment. I suppose it comes of his innocence, Ivan Fyodorovich Epanchin concluded, and to encourage such inclinations is in any case rather dangerous, but at the present moment it's really not bad that he has decided to come, though in such an original manner. He may even amuse us a bit, at least so far as I can judge about him. The more so as he's invited himself. Ferdishchenko put in at once. So what of it? The general, who hated Ferdishchenko, asked dryly. So he'll have to pay at the door, the latter explained. Well, all the same, sir, Prince Mishkin isn't Ferdishchenko. The general could not help himself, having been so far unable to accept the thought of being in the same company and on an equal footing with Ferdishchenko. Hey, General, spare Ferdishchenko, the latter said, grinning. I'm here under special dispensation. What is this special dispensation of yours? Last time I had the honor of explaining it to the company in detail, I'll repeat it once more for Your Excellency. Kindly note, Your Excellency, everybody else is witty, but I am not. To make up for it, I asked permission to speak the truth, since everybody knows that only those who are not witty speak the truth. Besides, I'm a very vindictive man, and that's also because I'm not witty. I humbly bear with every offense, until the offender's first misstep. At his first misstep I remember at once and at once take my revenge in some way. I kick, as Ivan Petrovich Tin said of me, a man who, of course, never kicks anybody. Do you know Krulov's fable, Your Excellency? The Lion and the Ass *39 Well, that's you and me both, it was written about us. It seems you're running off at the mouth again, Ferdishchenko, the general boiled over. What's that to you, Your Excellency? Ferdishchenko picked up. He was counting on being able to pick it up and embroider on it still more. Don't worry, Your Excellency, I know my place. If I said you and I were the lion and the ass from Krylov's fable, I was, of course, taking the ass's role on myself, and you, Your Excellency, are the lion, as it says in Krylov's fable. The mighty lion, terror of the forest, in old age saw his strength begin to fail. And I, Your Excellency, am the ass. With that last bit I agree, the general imprudently let slip. All this was, of course, crude and deliberately affected, but there was a general agreement that Ferdishchenko was allowed to play the role of buffoon. But I'm kept and let in here, Ferdishchenko once exclaimed, only so that I can talk precisely in this spirit.